Good evening. I love the sound of a bottle of wine being opened. On behalf of Christine Brancolini, Dean of the William H. Hannon Library here at Loyola Marymount University, I would like to welcome each and every one of you to our first faculty pub night of the 2018-2019 season. I'm John Jackson. I'm head of outreach and communications for the William H. Hannon Library, and this is our 9th year.
We're changing channels.
Oh, we're changing channels. Okay, we're good. This is our 9th year hosting Faculty Pub Night. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our program, this is how it works. Every year we invite 8 faculty members from across campus to talk about a recent publication. So Faculty Pub Night, publication, I hope you get it now. This is meant to be a recognition of the innovative and creative work that our faculty colleagues produce, but also it's an opportunity to connect faculty, staff, and students from across academic units and departments. We have 7 more Faculty Pub Nights planned for this year, and I hope that you'll join us. I have some flyers on the seats for our future speakers, but if you don't have one, we have some more at the front. Now, to all the students in the audience. So we call this Faculty Pub Night, but it's not just for faculty, and it's not 21 or older only. We will card you at the bar, but please tell your friends that this is open to all students and all faculty and all staff. So, I'm thrilled that there's so many of you in the room. This is a really great opening for our event. A couple of bits of administrivia before we get started. So you'll notice that there are feedback forms on your chairs. Please, yes, our Dean of the Library is modeling them right now. I hope that you will fill those out. Let us know what you learned, what surprised you this evening. You'll also notice that if you give us your email address, you'll be entered into a raffle for a $100 Amazon gift card. I think in the M School, that's about maybe a third of a book. So also, there's going to be a short time, hopefully, for Q&A afterwards. So you can hold your questions to the end. And finally, for our students in the audience, if you'd like to get LMU Leo credit for attending this course, you can find me afterwards and I'll swipe you in. If you don't know what LMU Leo credit is, then don't worry about it. Okay. So, let's get started. We're going to do things a little bit differently than how we've done this in the past. We have invited Father Deck, who is our distinguished scholar of theology and Latino studies here at Loyola Marymount University, to give an opening invocation. So please join me in welcoming Father Deck.
Good evening, everyone. It's a delight to be here with you for such an outstanding program. I just want to take a moment to focus a bit on the fact that it's 9/11 and to consider the topic that we're discussing on 9/11. I think it's very timely. And also to reflect for just a minute about the presence of God always in our midst as we go about our work, trying to make this a better world. Let us recognize, loving God, the greater global context and the implications of our efforts as educators and community leaders, as students, to understand the challenges that we face today. Challenges to human dignity, the rule of law, and democratic freedoms in these times of epochal change. We pray for deeper insight into the complex issues of security, cybersecurity, privacy, that Adriana Sanford tackles in her writing, her teaching, and her media work, which she will share with us this evening. Make us, Lord, responsive to the message that we will hear tonight. Inspire us with a willingness to use these insights for the hard work of making our families, our communities, businesses, our universities, and churches more secure and free for the service of the common good of the one and only human family. Be with us as we seek light to confidently continue our journey in pursuit of fuller life and human dignity everywhere. We ask this in the name of a loving God. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Deck. Okay, now allow me to bring to the podium Andrew Rome, who will introduce tonight's featured speaker. Professor Rome joined the LMU faculty in 2011 from Northeastern University in Boston, and he is the professor of marketing within the College of Business Administration here at LMU, and is also the co-founder and co-director of LMU's M School Initiative, a transformative and immersive undergraduate program focusing on marketing, branding, and advertising industries. Please join me in welcoming Professor Rowe.
Thank you. Every time I see John, I think I'm going to have to migrate to the bow tie, but I'm just not sure if I could tie one. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pub Night. I'm super excited to introduce our Pub Night speaker today. I met her just over a year ago when she began teaching in our business law program here at LMU, and I can tell you I have seldom met someone and sensed someone with so much energy and passion emanating just from one individual. And I really didn't think it was humanly possible for someone to have so much energy. I swear she doesn't sleep. I get emails and texts from her night and day as she is doing some incredible thing or reporting from some amazing conference while I'm simply eating a bag of Doritos, binge watching a show on Netflix. So this evening's Pub Night speaker is an international expert in the areas of corporate corruption and cybersecurity. She works across a broad range of global organizations to help address and educate on the issue of global threats. How timely is that, right? On top of all of this, she applies her real-life experiences and knowledge to those students fortunate enough to be in and take her classes. She's also served on the advisory committee of the World Economic Forum's Partnering Against Corruption initiative and regularly appears as a commentator on international television outlets such as CNN. As I mentioned, I'm truly excited to introduce and for all of you to hear from our September Pub Night speaker, Professor Adriana Sanford. Sadly, I'm teaching class right now, so I'm going to exit right, but it's great to have met many of you. Thanks, John.
It's an honor to be here, and I asked for this night. When I applied to speak, I asked for the 9/11 night because I thought this was really the only night I wanted to come. It means a lot to me and what I do, and the ability to speak to you guys on this night is really precious to me. I wrote a book, the last book, and that's what this is about. It's Women in Security, Changing the Face of Technology and Innovation. This book is about women that are making changes, and I was featured in it, and I took my chapter to actually write about the issues that concern me. So I have two different things I want to share with you. One, why I was picked for this book, and two, what are the issues that concern me that I think should hopefully concern you, and if they don't, maybe after tonight they will. This is my daughter, and she's not here, so I have her picture. I think it's important when we have issues such as the ones that are present today that we involve our students and we involve our children. So my children have been lucky enough to be raised by me and to learn about global threats and whatnot and actually partake in this experience of trying to combat it. Which way do I go?
Down. There we go.
What's going on today? Governments around the world are basically changing their laws. They're amending their laws and regulations. And we're seeing a trend out there. The reason they're doing this is because we have, according to the OECD, 41 countries have agreed to amend and revise their laws with regards to corruption and with regards to money laundering. We also have countries that are looking at human trafficking and are revising their laws to deal with the human trafficking in the global supply chain. And the one that we're really seeing in the news right now is with regards to the data protection and cyber and privacy. These have been very, very big out there. There are global threats, and according to the World Economic Forum, some of the worst global threats out there right now are human trafficking in the supply chain, counterfeiting, product counterfeiting, and cyber. There are others as well. There's climate, change and some other ones. The ones that I specialize in deal with privacy, human trafficking, and counterfeiting. This is important for us, and it's important here in California especially because we are seeing our laws change. And they're changing right now. We've got the new CCPA that's coming out, the California Consumer Privacy Act. This is a big deal. We are the first state out there to have such a stringent law on privacy. And although this is not going to take effect until January 2020, this will change and impact the United States as a whole. Why? Because we don't have the basic fundamental right to privacy in this country like other countries do. And this is the closest thing to it. Some people are calling this the mini GDPR, and I will describe what the GDPR is. The GDPR is actually a new law that came into effect in May of this year and affects our US businesses. It affects companies all over the world with regards to data and data transfers. Now, the interesting thing about the CCPA is the fact that this gives California residents a right to privacy. It's not really like the GDPR though, because the mini GDPR is what they're calling this. The GDPR basically gives a fundamental right to privacy to EU citizens. Well, they have that, and it protects that right. This one, on the other hand, only protects you when you're a resident in California. So for those of you who decide to move out of the state, you're going to lose it. It's an incentive to keep you here. So this is important, and I'm bringing it up right now because what we're going to see is that Facebook and Google and Microsoft and all these companies have spent a lot of time revising their privacy laws. And you'll notice it when you're on social media and all of a sudden it gives you a new little privacy. We've updated our privacy rules. Why? Because the laws around the world are changing. And the GDPR is the strongest. It's in Europe. It's the EU law. But a lot of other countries in the world are matching up. To the extent they match up, guess what? Our companies have to amend their regulations, their procedures. We're going to get into that, and we're going to get into the fact that this book and my chapter on this book actually deals with the tech industry and the executives and what happens when we have competing and conflicting laws. What happens? Sometimes our executives go to jail. Not good. So we're going to talk about that and where we are right now and how this has affected our tech industry and maybe steps that we can take to try to figure out if there's a way out. Cybercrimes. Cybercrimes, the cost of cybercrimes to the global economy is estimated to go up to $500 billion annually. It's huge. And the problem with this is it's a borderless crime. So to the extent we have countries with lax laws or no laws, we're going to have a problem. We need to be able to cooperate with regards to this with other countries. We need to get along. And for that, we need to respect each other's laws and make sure that they don't conflict. Because to the extent that they conflict, we're not going to get anywhere. It's the same issue we're going to have with regards to money laundering, with regards to corruption, with regards to counterfeiting, with regards to human trafficking in the supply chain. These are issues that are very, very difficult to combat, which is why they're global threats. And the only way to combat this is if we can come and figure out some uniform standards where our companies are not caught in the middle. So these are my areas, and human trafficking in the supply chain, security and privacy, and of course the confusion, sorting through the confusion, which is basically our tech industry and our executives are trying to sort through, and a mosaic structure of laws and regulations that are out there from different and competing countries and different regulators. It's difficult. So I was for 20 years an international corporate lawyer, and I focused on money laundering and corruption and all of these issues. And about almost a decade ago, I switched. And the reason I switched was I felt there was a need to educate. And I have been educating the public through radio and through TV, and the different global organizations through my writing. I've been writing for about almost 8 years for the Institute for Supply Management, which is the largest institute in the world for supply chain leaders. Those articles are actually part of their Forward Scan and their Insight Supply Management magazine, they reach 90 countries. So I'm able to talk, or at least express my opinion, to professionals in the supply chain. And that to me is very powerful. The GDPR is something that we are hearing a lot about. In January, nobody really knew about it. Today, everybody talks about it. GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. Okay? In the book, I actually go through how we got to this stage. Why is the GDPR here? And if we have time today, I will go through that with you. In the meantime, I will just tell you that this started with the Snowden revelations. When Snowden revealed that there was mass surveillance, that affected other countries terribly, because some other countries believe in a fundamental right to privacy. Now that's a basic human right for them. So the fact that another country was looking at their citizens' data, that was a big deal, especially for the EU. And the EU used to have a directive, which was similar to our patchwork. In this country, we don't have one uniform law with regards to data or privacy, right? This is why we're now getting the California CCPA. The GDPR, before this, we had a directive, and that directive was a patchwork. It was a guideline that all the different countries within the EU, the 28 countries, could take and adopt pieces. So there was a patchwork system. This was done in the mid-1990s when the internet first came out. But after the Snowden revelations, the EU looked at this and said, you know what, we need something a lot more powerful, because we can't have somebody looking into the data of our citizens. And we need something that's uniformly spread across all the countries. This is actually good. Some people sometimes ask me, well, what do you think of the GDPR? Isn't that a terrible thing? I said, no, the GDPR actually simplified. It simplified everything for us, because what happened is, before this came into play, somebody working in Europe, if you had a business and you were working in Italy and France and Spain, and you had a data breach, you would have to contact every one of those countries and tell them about the breach. Not only that, you also had to figure out what the laws were and how they were a little bit different, because they may not have adopted all of that directive. Today, with the GDPR, everything is streamlined. There's a one-stop shop. You don't have to go to every country that you're doing business with. You actually get one country where they will give you a data protection. They'll give you an authority that you can talk to and you can tell, and then they will go ahead and deal with the issue. We can get into this a little bit more later and what the GDPR is, but some of you may already know this, so I want to move forward. And then at the end we can, especially my students should know this, right? So, and the big deal is, if you do not have the GDPR in place, or something that actually respects the rights of these citizens from the EU, no matter where they are, they could be here in California, you won't be able to transfer their data. You'll be banned from doing this. This is important because it has an extraterritorial reach, and it will actually follow those citizens anywhere they go. So yes, our companies in the United States, it doesn't matter if you're not present in Europe. LMU has to abide by this, because we have students here from the EU. If you have any connection with EU citizens, either marketing to them, or online, or students, or interns, you have to follow the GDPR. And this is difficult for our medium and smaller companies, because they don't have in-house counsel. And you know what? If they have not been working outside of their space in California, why would they ever think that the laws, international laws, would ever affect them? So this is a big deal, because it does. GDPR harmonizes data protection laws across the European Union and establishes a one-stop shop. The nice thing about this is this framework is being used by other countries all over the world. Argentina, Japan, there's a whole bunch of different countries that are looking at this. Australia. Now the issue is, to the extent that they don't match up, we need to figure out how to comply if we are working in those countries. So that's another issue for our tech industry and for all of our companies that are dealing with privacy. What I suggest is rather than trying to match up, let's go broader. If we protect more and we go broader, it will be easier for us than if we keep trying to match up with those laws. So the approach has to be a little bit different because there's too many laws out there. I speak on a lot of different shows. Cybersecurity, basically, this is one of the best ones, Task Force 7. And I've been speaking there for about a year. I'm actually their #1 fastest growing episode was this one. Guess why? It's called Blockchain Technology. Is blockchain technology going to change the world? This is an issue that concerns people. This is an issue that's really, really important today. And if you're not listening to this show, I would recommend that you start listening to it if you want to get the most updated information, because it covers cryptocurrency, cybersecurity, covers cybersecurity attacks, it covers blockchain, and all these other areas. So it's pretty good. It's very good. In addition to women in security, before that, I actually published 2 other books. And I'm bringing them up because why did I come out in this book? It's because these other books, and I made little ones so that actually executives can take them on airplanes with them. They were adopted by the Institute for Supply Management for their 100-year anniversary. Both of them, in English and in Spanish. They're different. I co-authored those books with some of the leaders out there that deal with these issues. The Chief Technology Officer for Hewlett-Packard for Europe, Middle East, Asia, and Africa was one of my co-authors. Bruce Segueras, who represents 14 governments in changing the laws on money laundering and has represented the UN, was there as well. And there were a couple other authors. But they are people that are actually have the practical knowledge and have looked at these issues. And what we talk about in those, they're called Business Ethics, a guide to surviving challenges, risks, and storms, challenges, and ethical risks. What does that mean? It covers cyber, it covers human trafficking, it covers counterfeiting. It covers some of the challenges that our supply chain may not necessarily know what to do with. They're trained, but they're not trained in these areas. And too many times our executives have these challenges and they're not really sure what to do. Or they don't really understand what they have. We can't fight terrorism, we can't fight terrorist financing if we don't understand what we have before us. These books give you a glimpse of how bad it is and why you should care about it. We're not asking for a victory garden anymore. The victory garden was growing your fruit so that, growing your vegetables and helping. Today we don't need a victory garden to fight the war and to fight terrorism and to fight organized crime. What we need is our students and our executives to understand the issues and their role. There's a new role for the private sector in combating corruption. Business ethics, the chapters were sophisticated product counterfeiting, anti-money laundering laws, regulation, human right-related risks, and corporate scandals and whistleblowers, as well as the cyber. And the other one basically is the same. It's similar, but it was adapted to Latin America because different regions have different issues and different concerns. So from there, I started to get really into cyber and looking at what the issues were, because cybersecurity and STEM in general is the way of the future, is a way of actually tackling some of these global threats. So unfortunately, Chile, I'm half Chilean, half American, Chile and Mexico have the lowest STEM education out of the OECD countries. This was very concerning to me because if we are going to participate and have an active voice in solving some of the world's challenges, we need to have the proper education in STEM. If you don't know this, Chile has one of the lowest representations in the United States. It is one of the smallest groups from South America here present in the US. And obtaining a STEM education in Chile in the high schools is still difficult sometimes. What makes matters worse is Chile also has the lowest female labor participation out of all of Latin America. So this is why I decided to get involved and I decided to get engaged, and it became my passion. And last year I went down there and I taught. I taught 100 students, MBAs and undergrad. I also took my daughter with me, and we started mentoring women. And meeting with government officials. This is the brother of the current president of Chile, and we met with his think tank, which is one of the leading think tanks in Chile and in Latin America, and I spoke. I spoke on the private sector's role in combating corruption. We know that women are half of the world's population. But did you know that only 11% of women are in information security? I told you that Mexico also has an issue. I started working with the Ministry of Education. That's the Vice Minister of Education, Javier Torino. I was their keynote speaker for the largest IT telecom technology conference in Latin America, and we did it in Mexico. What was the topic? Competing and conflicting laws for tech executives, so everybody wanted to come. It's sad, but I don't know how many of you know this, but the director of Latin America for Facebook was in his job, I think, 6 months before he got arrested in Brazil. And he got arrested not because Facebook had done anything wrong, but because WhatsApp did not have a presence in Brazil, and that was their affiliate. And the government of Brazil was requesting certain information, certain data that had been stored, they thought had been stored by a user. Well, those of you who know what WhatsApp is, you know that they don't store the data. So they couldn't comply with it, and as a result of that, we ended up with an executive in jail. So these are concerns. This is one of the biggest concerns that some of our executives have. Women make up half of the total U.S. college-educated workforce, but only a third are in science and engineering. This is in the United States. We talked about Chile. And what we see is that the women, the female scientists, actually are concentrated in different occupations than the men. 62% of them are in social sciences, 48% are in biological, agricultural, and environmental life sciences, and a very small share of them are actually in math and engineering. So the first thing I did was I started to recruit my own kids. Of course, that's what happens when you have a mother like me, right? That's my daughter and my son and my daughter's best friend became my STEM ambassadors. And my son was at Caltech. He actually won the award for diversity at Caltech. And that's LMU. And I started with LMU last year, as Andy mentioned. And that was actually in Washington, D.C., recruiting for women in STEM. So that was in San Diego. According to the World Economic Forum, globally 16% of female students will graduate with a STEM major. So what we did, these are my ambassadors. Not anymore, now they're done with high school. But basically, they would recruit other high school students. And I recruit not only high school students, but also college students that are interested in STEM. And we match them up with global organizations so that they can be mentored and so that they can attend the conferences for free. Because one of the big issues is the cost of the conferences. And this allows those members of the conferences to actually meet our youth and our students to actually get to participate and learn from the executives and also later get internships. So it works out really well, and it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you're here in California or if you live in New York, because we have women all over the United States that are waiting to reach out. And this is done through several organizations. One of my favorite is the Sands Institute. This was a Women's Connect event, and we actually did that with the Girl Scouts and a whole bunch of other organizations that were interested in mentoring women and promoting women in STEM. Now, I've been talking about STEM. The newest thing out there is STEM to STEAM. And what does that mean? That means science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. We're looking at the arts as well because it is basically another area where you can reach a lot of people. Media, film. And when we're looking at global threats, these are different ways where we can actually reach people. This is Alexa, next to my daughter's Alexa Palladino. She's going to be starring as Robert De Niro's wife in The Irishman. And next to Alexa is a YouTuber, or 2 YouTubers, and then the other ambassador. But we're looking basically at entertainment, we're looking at other areas, and basically how to reach women and promote the sciences. As I mentioned, I sometimes take my students. If they're interested, I take them. This was the largest international conference for ISM, and I took 10 of my students. The one on the left, the girl was interested in Boeing. I introduced her to Boeing, and now she's been working there for 2 years. So it works. If we can match our students with these companies, they get jobs. I mentioned women. I should also mention Hispanics. Hispanics and other minorities. It's another issue. Hispanics in the U.S. represent 15% of the workforce, but only 8% of the STEM workforce. So I promote that. I work with that on a daily basis. I look at these issues, and I look at the companies, and I look at the way that we can actually get our students engaged and help those companies out, because the students, right now I have a class that I'm teaching on cybersecurity law and policy. Those students understand the global threats. I also have a class on business law. Believe me, those students are also well versed in these issues. So matching these companies and these students works really well for our students, and it works really, really well for the companies. They have that training. I also talked to executives. This was actually an event, a CISO forum, the ISSA, and it was sponsored by Hewlett Packard. I was their keynote speaker. My topic, conflicts of laws. I have 6 years of law education. I have 3 years from Georgetown, a JD, and then I have 2 LLMs. My JD from Notre Dame, my LLMs from Georgetown. Out of those, I have 3 pure years of international comparative law. A year and a half was at Georgetown, and I also had Notre Dame in London. I bring that up because most students only have 1 class on international comparative law. I have 3 years. So I'm able to spot things that other people probably can't. And that's why I talk about it. Here we're talking about competing and conflicting laws. My areas, I'm an APB speaker, and that's the American Program Bureau. And my areas are global threats and data security, cyber, as well as how to survive the different terrains, how to survive in a supply chain, how to survive if you're in a country that is corrupt. And lastly, we're dealing with blockchain and cryptocurrency. In Latin America, I have worked with La Universidad Católica, and I also worked with La Universidad Talca on issues of human rights and issues of corruption. here this was United Nations in Chile. Una mirada al futuro. All over the world, we've got different pockets, different organizations that are out there that are trying to help students. So to the extent we can find them and we can work together, it benefits our students and it benefits those countries and their students. I also speak on TV, I'm an international TV commentator, and one of the shows that I'm on quite frequently is, over the last 2-3 years, has been CNN Dinero. CNN Dinero is part of CNN Español, and they reach 25 or 24 million viewers in Latin America and in the United States. And my topics are the issues that our executives are facing. And when they come out with a scandal, I talk about what that scandal means and basically what we need to look at. For example, the FBI case. The Apple FBI case was a lot more complex than what a lot of people were talking about. And it dealt with, if we let this go, what will it do? What is the impact in the rest of the world? So I look at these issues, and generally I will come on and I will explain the international ramifications, the global perspective to what's going on domestically, or why a tech executive is not moving forward. It's not that they don't want to comply, it's that sometimes they can't comply because the laws are conflicting with one another. This is all very important. Why? Because in 2022, we are going to have a workforce gap. Over 1.8 million is projected. So companies, I'm hoping, will fill some of those positions by recruiting more women and also by looking at minorities if we get them ready. And why is it so important? Because as I mentioned to you, the STEM education in Mexico and in Chile and in some of these other Latin American countries is not very good. So to the extent we can help with that, we're dealing with this on a regional basis. We have the issue with privacy, we have the issue with corruption, we have the issue with counterfeiting. My goal is to be able to educate the whole region, because then our laws will be more standardized and we'll be able to do better business, and we will actually be able to stamp out some of those issues that we have, some of those concerns. So where are we today? Government officials are all struggling. They're struggling to combat terrorism. They're also struggling to keep their citizens safe and their information private. But there's a problem with that because there are different approaches to combating terrorism. And we know this for a fact, right? We know that in the United States, sometimes we use mass surveillance. Mass surveillance is an issue in other countries because they believe in a basic fundamental right to privacy. We also know that other countries use other methods that maybe the United States does not seem to think that they are modern enough or of value. So we have different ways, different approaches to dealing with combating terrorism, to dealing with privacy. But we work together. And I don't know how many of you know this, but in India has recently passed a new law as well. They're looking at privacy as well. And this is a problem for us because we're realizing that a lot of the countries that we're dealing with, we outsource a lot to India. And India has biometric, the largest biometric system in the world. 1.2 billion people have their irises, have their fingerprints, have all that information stored. And to the extent we're dealing with a country like India, and now they have a basic fundamental right to privacy, and their laws are changing, it's going to affect us. And the way they fight terrorism is going to change, and the way we fight terrorism, we've got to figure this out. We've got to work together in order to stamp out cyber attacks, in order to have economic growth, and in order to have our human rights respected. Keep going the wrong way. All right, so do we have time to go over a little bit of this? Yes? Okay. So the book. my chapter in the book, I'm going to go through this quickly because I think most of you understand this area, but basically the Snowden, you may or may not agree with what Snowden did, depending on whether you believe he was, well, we won't even get into that. What we will say is that he put privacy on the table. And all of a sudden, the world realized that data could be transferred and looked at by governments. And this was basically done. You could basically read any information on a smartphone, including the GPS and location, the emails, and the notes. This was really what got the EU started with the General Data Protection Regulation. What he disclosed was that the mass surveillance was not only in the United States, the mass surveillance was taking place in France, in Italy, in Greece, in Japan, South Korea, India, and in certain pockets of Latin America. And this was being done with the tech industry in conjunction with them. And basically, US companies must follow US law. The tech industry basically had to comply with the requests made by the US government. They were asking for information on certain users. We had 9 internet firms that were working on this. And among them, it was Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo. So basically what happened next is when the EU found out that this was going on, they raised these concerns with these companies. And they said, yes, I understand you have to follow US law. You're a US company, you follow US law, but guess what? You also have to follow EU law because you're working in our region. And this is where the problem started with regards to cyber and privacy. Now remember, we don't only have the issue here, we also have the issue with our money laundering and with corruption. Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines all give you basically your very own money laundering offense if you don't report. We can find a whole bunch of different laws in different countries that will affect us, and the liability, the criminal liability can be very strong. If you like cryptocurrency, I can tell you that Bangladesh is 12 years imprisonment if you're dealing with crypto. So you want to know these laws. And if you live in France, you want to know that you cannot put your children's pictures out on the internet because you will be criminally liable for that as well. So depending on the country you're dealing with, there are laws that are different from our own. And you have to be aware of that. What happens when you're not aware? Well, Max Schrems is a name that my students know. Max Schrems was a Santa Clara law student. And guess what? Facebook paid them a visit. And in that class, Max Schrems raised his hand and asked about privacy. And the Facebook executive said that they didn't care about the privacy issue. Big mistake. Max Schrems went back to Europe and basically sued. Largest class action ever brought in the history of privacy was brought by a Santa Clara law student. And as a result of that, we had over 4,000 companies in the US unable to transfer their data. End result. What happened? The invalidation of the US-EU Safe Harbor Agreement. This agreement had been in place for 15 years. It was the way that a company could transfer their data back and forth between the US and the EU. This is a big deal, especially think about it if you have a subsidiary, if you have a branch, and you've got employees in one place that all of a sudden work in another country. That HR person could no longer transfer that data. That intern that you hired, that now you wanted to move to another place, you couldn't get their information. This stopped everything. It was a big deal, and this happened in October. October 2015. So Max Schrems changed the way the world dealt with privacy. After Snowden came Max Schrems. If anybody wants to see what he looks like. And actually, you know what this is? This is his file from Facebook that he requested of the information that they had on him, on his social media. See, so Max Schrems believes in his fundamental right to privacy, and so did a lot of Europeans. And that's why now, today, in the United States, the way we look at privacy with regard to Europe is different. We don't have a fundamental right to privacy here in this country, but our laws and the way we deal with Europe, we now have something called the judicial redress, which says if we in the United States violate the rights of a citizen of Europe, of the EU, they're allowed to sue us. So we recognize their right to privacy, but we don't have a right to privacy for our citizens. That may change with this California legislation. I believe it's the beginning. I think that other states, right now we have a patchwork system, and I think that other states will follow this framework. And if they don't follow California's framework, guess what? It's still going to affect them. Because anybody who does business with California has to comply with the California law. So it has an extraterritorial reach. And California has the 5th largest economy in the world. So just like the laws in India are going to affect every one of us that does outsourcing with India, California's law is going to affect the United States, and it's going to affect companies all over the world. I'm sorry, I keep going the wrong way. Not used to this one. So privacy. Why do we look at privacy differently? Well, in the EU, my European citizen, and we're going to make you European, she has a basic fundamental right that goes with her wherever she is and is 100%, everything she does, she has a basic fundamental right to privacy. In the United States, we don't have that. We have different sections that we have privacy. We have privacy with regards to financial issues. We have privacy with regards to health, with regards to medical records, with regards to school records. But we don't have that overall right. Our system was never set up that way. The Canadian system wasn't set up like that either, but the Canadian system is changing. They don't have, we have in the United States a test which says, do I have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Canada has changed their test to now look more at a proportionality test. There are other countries that are stepping up as well and saying, you know what, we need to take another look at this. And that's why I was happy to see that California has stepped up. I'll get this before the end of this presentation. So, tech industry, the last 4 years, they have expressed a lot of concern about those laws and regulations and the unintended consequences. Like, for example, going to jail for non-compliance. Which law do we break? No company and no executive should ever have to be put in that predicament of having to decide. Nor do we want them deciding for us. We need to figure this out. Encryption. Encryption was a big one because we remember we had that wake of hack attacks. The banks were very concerned. We were very concerned because our information was out there and all of a sudden you had to go get a new card and now we have a chip. So it's a little bit better. But several companies went ahead and strengthened their encryption because of this. Well, that's a great thing for us, but it wasn't a good thing for law enforcement because law enforcement needed that information, and for them, they were pushing the other way. The DOJ was very concerned about that because they said it's going to make it harder. Terrorists can hide. And that's true. That's totally true. But it's also true that we have banking. We use our phones for banking. And if we don't have encryption, our information is not safe. So there are competing interests. It's not like one is right and one is wrong. So what happened next? We start seeing something. We start seeing our tech companies not abiding by U.S. law. It's not that they don't want to. They're U.S. companies. Of course they want to abide. But what happened is with that Snowden revelation, Verizon lost their contract with the government of Germany, and several tech companies were told, if you continue to provide information, you can't do business in our country. You can't do business in Germany, in France. They threatened the tech industry. They were very concerned about it. So what happened next is Microsoft was asked to provide certain information, but the problem is that the information was stored in Ireland. Microsoft said, well, we need to do this the right way. We need to talk to Ireland. and we can't just give you that information because it's stored offshore. The US government said, no, we want that information now. We're in the middle of an investigation. We need it quickly. We don't have time for that mutual agreement that we have, the MLAT. But Microsoft did not give the information. They ended up in contempt of court. But there's a bigger problem that we figured out. As a result of that, we realized that US warrants may not have the power when we're dealing with other jurisdictions. So the fact that Microsoft did not turn that information over, the US government couldn't get it because it was offshore. But guess what? That agreement, the MLAT agreement, basically says that that information can be given, but not with regards to US employees. And US employees are the only ones that can deal with that user information. So basically, neither country can access it. So these are real challenges, and there's tons of challenges like this. And you say, wait, so what are we doing? And perhaps one of the big ones is when people can't comply. When companies can't comply because the technology is not there. Because the technology does something different. And we end up with executives in jail. So, what are we asking for? In May 2015, Apple and 140 tech companies got together. They're united now because they all have a common problem. And they asked if there was any way to promote stronger encryption. This was the second. After Microsoft came the Apple iPhone FBI case. This was a San Bernardino case where the terrorists had an iPhone, and unfortunately it became locked, and we really needed to get into it. Again, it was an issue. It was a very difficult issue, and I heard on media, I heard a lot of people say, well, Apple is pro-terrorist. I was like, what? No, Apple is not pro-terrorist. And Apple does comply and does work with the government. The problem here was that what was being requested was information, was a way, a backdoor, a key to get into this. And if the United States gets a hold of that key, any other country could ask for that as well. Not only that, that could open up the door for hackers, and it was a lot more complex. So these are the issues that sometimes we don't really know how the extent of the problem, and sometimes a decision that we make in one country can affect us globally, can impact us in other parts of the world, and can leave people at risk. According to Apple CEO Tim Cook, he said this legal order had implications far beyond the legal case at hand. It's very difficult for them to talk on these subjects and to explain what's going on, and it's very, very frustrating when you hear reports that are not accurate. Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon have expressed their concerns, and they said sometimes companies are being forced to prioritize government access over digital security, and this is a concern, especially when we're dealing with smartphone and banking. Now, whether you believe that statement is correct or not, what you will notice is the tech industry is getting frustrated. Executives are getting frustrated. And that's not a good place. You don't go to your job, you didn't dream of having this job and then having to deal with these issues. You want to deal with the day-to-day issues of consumers, right? And mergers and acquisitions, right? You don't want to deal with issues of turning over information on terrorism and international white-collar crime. For the first time ever, we ended up seeing something else. Not only did we have companies in contempt, right? Companies not listening to the DOJ and the US court orders, like Apple and like Microsoft, we had something else. We actually had Microsoft sue the US government, sue the DOJ. So they took, instead of the defensive, they took the offensive side, and they said, you know what? We need some answers here. We have electronic gag orders. We have search warrants. Search warrants that we believe don't comply with the US Constitution, because a search warrant basically needs to be given to the person that doesn't know, because there's a third party involved, doesn't work. And these gag orders, some of them had no time limit. So basically, it's an infringement on our freedom of speech. And Microsoft said we had, in 18 months, we had over 5,624 of those. So Microsoft sued, and this escalated. Not only did it escalate, and we ended up having, finally the US government said, okay, we can tell you, you're allowed to disclose that some area is being searched, but not specific people. So there was a compromise. Something at least was given. But we noticed bulk data retention became a big issue. Because what's the point of the government going after information if people are deleting it, if it's being deleted, like the WhatsApp? In the UK had the Brexit, right? They pulled away. And the UK said, you know what? We want mass surveillance. Just like the US, they wanted mass surveillance. So you know what they did? They passed the Snooper Charter. That's not the real name, but that's what we call it. Why? Because it allows you to snoop into people's history. The Snoopers Charter. And they said, we're going to make it legal. In this country, we're going to call it what it is. It's called the Snoopers Charter, and we're going to actually start looking at people's information. So you have to companies must keep data retention. Well, the European Court of Justice said no. The European Court of Justice, basic fundamental right to privacy for all EU citizens, said you can't do this. General and indiscriminate retention of personal identifiable data is inconsistent with privacy rights. So we're starting to see something else here. We're starting to see the UK is having the same issues with the European Court of Justice. The European Court of Justice is the Supreme Court, basically, in that region. So there's a Snoopers Charter. Permits the UK government to legally track millions of devices, including computers, smartphones, and snoop their history. And guess what? In order to do this, we need help from the tech industry. We need you to give us the information, that key, unlock the encryption, bypass encryption. This was not something the European Court of Justice liked. So at this point, the UK has 6 months to rewrite that. That, I think, happens in October of this year. So we're going to have to see what happens. This stuff is fresh, and it's happening before our eyes. So the next time you look at the news and you see something about this, you'll know exactly what we're talking about and what the issues are. Mandatory retention and backdoors for encrypted communication are considered by some governments to be vital for modern investigative techniques. I think the United States thinks that. I definitely know that the UK thinks that. Necessary to combat organized crime and terrorism. And of course, terrorist financing. I've talked to the FBI about this, and I said, why do you guys want to do this? And I kind of understand their point, and I love listening. I can't tell you whether they're right or they're wrong or which approach is right. They're just different. We just have to know that they exist, and we have to realize that this space, this bubble, is actually affecting us in ways that we never imagined. And those tensions will continue to mount between government and technology companies until we no longer have those competing laws that put them in jail, that give them criminal liability, that give them those huge fines. Facebook got a $122 million fine from the Europeans because they didn't mention, when they brought on WhatsApp, they said that they could not access automatically the customers. But 2 years later, they did. So now they got hit. Why? Because in Europe, they don't want you to have that information flow back and forth. That's privacy. I'm sorry, I think I just... According to Microsoft's chief legal counsel, Brad Smith, people are placed in a situation where they have to decide what law to break. It isn't a comfortable place to be. Not only that, do we want Microsoft to decide which law to break? Which law is important? No. Does Microsoft want to decide that? No. These are issues that we're facing. And we can go a lot deeper. But I know that we don't have that much time. What I will tell you, though, is if you are working in Europe, and my students know this, and you've been working in the United States, and you've been in-house counsel in the US, and you're working on money laundering and corruption, and you're having a great time, and you want to go to France, or you want to go to Spain, and you just say, please, would you transfer me? You better reconsider your position. Because if you're in-house counsel, and you cross over to the EU, and you're still dealing with money laundering and all these issues that you had fun dealing with before and you were really good at, and all those executives, all those employees know you by heart and they like you, when you cross over, that attorney-client privilege is no longer there. And you have to disclose what you've heard. That's important for a company. That's important for that lawyer. And it's important for all those employees that were giving you the information. According to Europe, if there is an issue that involves them and it deals with money laundering, corruption, you can't use your in-house counsel for this. You have to use an external counsel. The in-house counsel is considered a regular employee because he wears many different hats. He can also be your compliance person. So you need to be aware of this, and companies many times are not aware of these issues. And in the United States, guess what? We're governed by states. I'm licensed to practice in California. I'm licensed to practice in Ohio. I'm licensed to practice in Florida. And sometimes I'm licensed to practice in all of these. And the way we deal with ethical challenges sometimes is different in different states. So a lawyer dealing internationally, dealing with these issues, may have competing ways of dealing with on a state level. And why are we letting a state, for example, Ohio or Idaho, any state, deal with international issues? We have to consider what we're doing here in this country with regards to lawyers and ethical issues that deal on an international level, where those lawyers are facing competing laws. This is another issue that's not being dealt with right now. There are many, which is why this is my passion. Uniformity. Governments need to work together. Where do I think we can get this uniformity? I think Europe is doing a great job. We follow them with the Know Your Customer. We have it here today. This framework, I think, is very good. Where I want to see uniformity is in Latin America. Because I think if we can get the whole region, we can make it a lot stronger. Snowden's revelations opened the international debate on the methods for accomplishing surveillance. There's targeted surveillance, which some people use, and there's a mass surveillance. We need to get more women into this area. We need to get more women into cybersecurity law. There are very few women in this field. There are very few schools that actually offer cybersecurity law. We also need to get more women in executive committees. Now, I think we've grown since 2014, but the top 20 tech companies only had 11% of those were women. Lastly, whatever it is that you choose to do, it's important that you look with a global perspective. Look at what's around you. I was a lawyer for 20 years. My passion is now this. I work with other people that are not lawyers, but have similar passions. Passions to do something, to serve, to lead. And it doesn't matter what you choose as a career. Alan Weissman, who's back there, is a photographer, one of the top photographers in LA for celebrities. But you know what? He does my pictures on global threats. You know, it doesn't matter. Jack Sacco is up here. Jack is an author. And the book he's writing, he's written one on his father, which is amazing. He'll tell you a little bit about it. right? And he's writing another one on humanitarians, finding a life worth living. And sometimes it takes a while to find that life. It takes a while to figure out what actually makes you passionate. But it's very rewarding. And you know what? You'll realize that those people that you're closest to will find their way too. And eventually, you all come back together. 2004, 2005, I created a Chile U.S. Chamber of Commerce of California. It wasn't a mom and pop chamber. It was 40 of the top companies, the executives, the C-suites. Why? This was 1 week after the signing of the free trade agreement between Chile and the U.S. The first South American, not Latin American, because that would have been Mexico, the first South American country to sign the free trade agreement. And we wanted to make sure that we were all together. The companies got together and we talked about the issues. This is what we need to do today. Peter Lambert was on that board. It's been 15 years and we're still together. I'm not asking you to join a chamber, but I'm asking you to look at the way you interact with one another. The way we think, interact, and behave is important, as are the judgments we make on each other. I will continue to explore ways to give my message. I believe education will give us peace. And not everybody can afford an education, but everybody has a right to know how to defend themselves against global threats. That's why I speak on the radio, that's why I write, that's why I go to different countries, and that's why I'm here at LMU. I was a delegate to the APEC CEO Summit. There are many global organizations out there where companies can get together and talk about their issues. It doesn't matter which one you pick. ISACA, ISA, ISC Squared, it's called. I'm speaking there in October. That's the largest cybersecurity conference is done by that organization. The SANS Institute, there's so many of them. Join them. As students, join them. ISM, if you're interested in supply chain, is free to you guys. These are some of the people that are very dear to me. Jim Greenbaum is actually here. These are people that have passion. Chief Technology Officer, former Chief Technology Officer for Hewlett-Packard, co-author. Joseph Attic. Joseph Attic actually invented facial recognition. What is he doing today? ID for Africa. What is ID for Africa? ID for Africa is a way to document every person in Africa so that they have a voice. Before that, he was working on the Aadhaar system in India, biometric. Bruce Segaris, I mentioned him, 14 governments, he's changing the laws of money laundering and corruption, helping those governments. The State Department uses him to speak in Latin America. And Jim Greenbaum has a foundation that deals with human rights issues and other, do you want to say, what other, do you want to?
Animal rights and protection.
And animal rights.
And protection as well. Animal rights and protection as well, promoting whole foods, plant-based diets globally.
There we go. I will continue to engage with different people that have the same passion as I do, and I encourage you to do the same. We can learn from one another. We can learn from having different opinions on things. Not everybody, there's not one way to do something. There are many different ways. And if we understand that and we understand cultural diversity, it is a wonderful place for cross-fertilization, for innovation. I'd like Jack to say a few words with you about the other book.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay.
This is Jack.
Thank you. Hello. I just want to say something that you understand the power of Adriana Sanford. About 2 weeks ago, she called me in Alabama and said, will you be able to attend this meeting, this presentation? And I said, no. She said, let me rephrase the question. You're going to be there. So here I am.
And now he's speaking.
And then when I walked in tonight, she asked me if I could say a couple of words, and I'm happy to do that because as she's talking, I'm having all these ideas about. I'm an author and I'm writing a book that is going to not only encompass this, but it's going to talk about the heroes among us. There are heroes among us, and they're not necessarily sports stars or musicians or people you've heard of. They're people who are doing the really great things, or people like Adriana, like Jim, like Alan, and like so many of you here. Now, some of you are students that I've talked to. Is that correct? Or have contacted, and some of you I will be contacting to let you know more about. Just as a side note, I want to tell you a little quick story. I was giving a lecture on physics of all things, and some technology that I was working on a few years ago in Austria, in Vienna. And the people who were there included the Archduke Ferdinand's grandson, and the Liechtensteins, the Luxembourgs, and this whole group, and me. Okay, my grandparents were peasants in Sicily, in which, by the way, we're always trying to figure out what laws to break. But I was invited to speak on this subject. And while I was there, I formed a special friendship with the ambassador, the Archduke Ferdinand's grandson, who was in his 70s at the time. And we spent a week there, and I was peppering him with questions about his grandparents and the assassination at the start of World War I in 1914. And at the end of the week, I asked him, I said, Mr. Ambassador, you've told me a lot about your grandparents and your grandfather, but could you tell me something about your father? And I just felt like I had neglected his father the whole week. And he said, of all the things he could have told me, he said, my father during World War II was a prisoner at the concentration camp at Dachau. I said to him, well, how long was he there? He said he was there until April 29th, 1945. It was Sunday morning. And I said, well, he said the American soldiers liberated the camp. I said, there were only about 200 American soldiers there that day. And he said, I'm well aware of that. I said, well, my father was one of them. And he was a farm boy from Alabama, son of immigrants, went off to war, and it turned out that my father and his buddies, a small group, really saved the lives of the Archduke Ferdinand's son and the Duke of Luxembourg's grandparents, and all these people who were there, not to mention thousands upon thousands of others. The reason I mention this is because my father wasn't famous. He kind of is now because I wrote a book about it. But he wasn't famous. He didn't feel like he was humble. He didn't feel like he was doing something great. And what I found, and what I just want to tie this in with what Dr. Sanford said, is that the people that I've met in my life, and we're buddies from Notre Dame, is that the people who seem to do the greatest things are oftentimes the most humble, and are oftentimes going about their task, and they're paying attention to who they're with, and the people they surround themselves with, and how they can help other people. This is something that is a hallmark of this young lady here. And as the students know this, because I've spoken to so many of you, and will speak to more of you in the future, just think about that example. And she wanted me to just say a couple of words, and this is it, because I'm going to write this book. I'm going to be in touch with more of you probably, and you're going to hear more about in this new book, not only about her work and her life, but about others like Jim Greenbaum and Alan Weissman and his wife and Bruce Zagaris, who I met with in Washington D.C. Absolutely fantastic, and it goes beyond the headlines, beyond what they do, and this is how it affects each one of us. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me here and for making me get up, and please, I want you to really appreciate the great work that Dr. Sanford does. Thank you.
Now, real quickly, my students have bragged about some of you guys, and it would not be right for me not to point out first of all, I know. They had asked about who is the production designer for Jimmy Kimmel. This is David. Peter Lambert is with Willis Tower and Watson, and this is the third largest insurance company in the world.
But the best.
And the best one. And Rick Hernandez is with CNN. He's a CNN director. And Bennett Kelly is with the Internet Law Center, which is a really, really interesting place. And that was actually, I wanted to introduce you guys to that. So, over here we have Jim Greenbaum, who is with the Greenbaum Foundation, and you know all about that. And I also wanted to mention, we have Eddie. Eddie is with the Counterfeit Prevention Company. Back there we have Alan Weissman, who I already mentioned, and there he is. And then we have Brian Berry, and Brian is serves on the executive committee of the MIT Caltech Business Forum, and he's also the founder of the Dale Carnegie for Los Angeles and Ventura. Back here, I'm almost done. We have John Del Vecchio, and he is with the LAPD. I know some of you were interested in law enforcement. He was a second lieutenant. He's retired. And I won't tell him everything else because you can tell them. So anyway, did I miss anybody? Oh, and of course I have back here I have my TA that actually from ASU, where I taught 7,000 students. And I will tell you that this TA, Chaka Small, actually was an amazing TA and actually managed so many students. So I have to mention him as well.
So here you can take it.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Please join me again in thanking Adriana for speaking today. Our goal for Faculty Pub Night is to bring people together across departments, across institutions, across industries, and I think that you have done that here, and I look forward to seeing the conversations that y'all will continue to have. The bar is open for another 7 minutes, and so please continue to talk. Please come and ask Adriana questions if you have them, and also your feedback forms. If you have those, please just drop them off in the box here at the top. So thank you all for coming, and please continue the conversation.